The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about this vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. As we've come to this second Sunday of Lent, we hear the story of the Transfiguration, which is true every year. We have this account. We always begin Lent with hearing the story of Jesus going out into the desert and being tempted, and then it's followed by the Transfiguration. Where this Sunday we're not in a desert, but now we're on a mountain, and everything changes. We hear that Jesus' face changes. His clothes become dazzling white. And the Father's voice says, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." And as we reflect on that, we celebrate the Transfiguration in August, so why are we having this gospel now? And I think it's a reminder for us as to what Lent is really about. Lent, as much as we hear about the disciplines of Lent and how we're called to enter into prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, and all of that in that sense of a penitential time, and all that's very true, but why do we do all that? That's where this gospel becomes very important. It tells us what we're aiming for, why we're doing all of those things. Because what we experience in our gospel today is the transfigured Christ, the glorified Christ, what was going to happen after he rose from the dead. And so that's what we need to keep in mind. That's what we're aiming for, is to share in that life. And as we go along the way, we get some help to assist us, to some pointers. In our first reading, what did we hear? God tells Abram, "Go from your country to a land I will show you." Now, maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear any details about what was going to happen with going to this land. No map, no timeline, only a promise. So Abram could have said, "Excuse me, a little more details. I'm pretty comfortable where I'm at right now, so why should I do this?" But he trusted. So he leaves what is familiar to him to go to what he has promised. Maybe that's part of our Lenten journey. Do we have that kind of faith that we put aside? Maybe God is inviting us to put aside, leave something behind, a habit, a resentment, a pattern that keeps us from growing, that we've become very comfortable with, to aim for that promise of what he gives us, the promise of eternal life with him. But to do that, we're going to have to put aside some of those things perhaps. And we don't always see immediately what we are gaining. That's where that trust or that sense of faith has to come in. And then we hear in our second reading, St. Paul tells Timothy, join with me in suffering for the gospel. What does that mean for us? That means, following Christ involves perseverance. It means that staying faithful isn't going to be easy. There are going to be challenges there. There's going to be hardships there. But again, why are we doing it? We're doing it for the glory that Christ revealed to us. Paul reminds us in that same reading that Christ has destroyed death and brought life and immortality to light. Hardship is not the destination, but it is often a part of the road. And that's sometimes with the society that we live in today, it's hard to reconcile that in our head. We're always looking for the easy way out, or many of us do. And our faith journey isn't going to be necessarily that way. When we have our gospel today, it sort of jumps in, at this point, but what happened just before this gospel passage? Jesus had just shared with his closest friends that he was going to be arrested, persecuted, crucified, and then rise again. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, if my dearest friend said to me, died, I'm going to be killed, I probably didn't listen to anything else after that. And that's what happened with the disciples. He communicated to them, I'm going to be killed and rise, but they didn't understand what that rising meant. We understand it better today than what they would have because they hadn't experienced it yet. And so I'm sure that would have been very difficult for them to hear. This person that they've committed their life to has said that he's going to suffer and die. And that they too are going to have to take up their cross. So not only is he going to go through something, we're going to have to go through something too. So you can just imagine how unsettled they were and how they were pondering, reflecting probably on that. And Jesus, recognizing that, then takes three of them, Peter, James, and John, and allows them to share in something very, very powerful, something very, very amazing. And he goes up the mountain, and they get to experience Jesus in all of who he truly is. For a moment, they get to see his glory. The same Jesus who was going to be arrested, mocked, and crucified is the beloved Son of the Father, as we heard at the baptism. Now we're hearing again today. And he shows them this so that when the cross happens, and then the resurrection, through all of that, they'll remember this moment. And then they'll be able to share that with the others. When everything looks confusing and dark, hopefully they'll remember this, and then things will start taking on a different understanding. Because as we continue our journey during Lent, we have to remember that Lent is not the end. It's a path of preparation. The Transfiguration reminds us that the Christian life is not only about discipline, it's about transformation. We hear how Jesus' body was changed. We experience through this event the glorified body. But the interesting thing is, on the mountain, Jesus did not become something new. What was revealed is who he already was to begin with. And I think that's important for us on our journey too. God's not expecting us to become something new through our disciplines or whatever. What he's inviting us to is to fully embrace who we already are, who he created us to be. That's what he's desiring of us. Through prayer and fasting and charity, God's not trying to make us into someone else. He just wants us to fulfill who we originally were created to be. And that's why it's so important that we are on this journey and we allow God to draw out from us who we are. And that's where when Jesus hears these words, listen to him, the disciples hear those words, we too need to listen to him. So that we can, that goodness, that love, that beauty that God created us in at the beginning can be drawn out. We need to listen to the Father. Listen to us when he asks us to forgive. Listen to him when he asks us to trust him. Listen to him when he asks us to let something go. It's amazing how we try to hang on to things, and some of those things that we try to hang on to aren't things that we should be hanging on to, even though they may provide us with some comfort, perhaps even some joy for some time, but those aren't the things that we really should be hanging on to. And we need to be willing to go forward. And that was a lesson that Peter learned too in this gospel passage. What do we hear him say? Oh, let's make 3 tents. Let's just stay right here. This is so wonderful. We're just going to stay here. But just as Peter, James, and John couldn't stay up there, they had to come down. We too have to recognize that living on the mountaintop isn't where life is. The Christian life is lived in the ordinary days, in our day-to-day responsibilities, in our day-to-day obligations, in our day-to-day conversations, in our small sacrifices, in our parish life, in our school life, in our family life. That's where our Christian life is lived. And we need to live those days different, and we tend to live those days differently if we remember what the goal is. And that goal is that all of us needs to be on that path that leads to that heavenly kingdom. That's what we need to keep striving for. And that's what this gospel today is reminding us of. The goal. Anytime you deal with self-improvement or improvement in groups and all that, you always need to have a goal. What are we aiming for? We just had the Olympics. Most of them were aiming for those medals or a personal best. That's one thing that I always think sometimes gets diminished. Somebody does a personal best. That's quite an accomplishment. Even if they came in 10th or whatever, that was their personal best. They had never achieved that before. That's pretty awesome. And that's what we need to be looking at. What is our goal? What is God saying is already in me that I just need to purify, need to cleanse, need to strengthen so that I can be on that path that leads to heaven? A gospel like today reminds us that we're not walking toward defeat. We're walking toward Easter. We're walking toward the resurrection. A powerful event that Jesus suffered to get to, but he did it out of love for us. And it's that love that he wants to share eternity with us. So whatever you're working on this Lent, whatever you're trying to surrender, whatever ways perhaps that you're trying to allow God to draw out from you, that who you already were created to be, whatever you feel maybe is unfinished in your life, remember the mountain. Remember Jesus' transfiguration. Remember the goal. Remember the voice. And listen to him so that he will guide you, so that you can truly be on that path that will lead to not only experience Jesus' glory, but to be part of it for all eternity.